A dying man hid the truth in a locked box. A little girl handed that box to a stranger in the desert. And that stranger, a man who had sworn never to stop for anyone again, was about to discover that his name was already written inside it. Before he ever arrived, before he ever made the choice, someone had been waiting for him, someone had planned for him, and the woman whose life depended on that box had every reason in the world not to trust him. But her daughter looked him in the eye and said, "You are the one." Would you have stopped? Would you have stayed? This channel is home to stories of the American frontier tales of courage, love, justice, and the quiet strength of ordinary people who refuse to let the darkness win. Western grit, a mother's love, and the kind of human compassion that crosses every border. Here is what this story will remind you. The bravest thing a person can do is trust again after they have been broken. And sometimes a stranger carrying your husband's last letter is the answer to a prayer you did not know you had spoken. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, drop your city in the comments below, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and hit the like button so more people can find their way here.
I swore I would never stop for strangers again. I swore it standing over a grave in Abilene that should not have existed, holding papers that arrived 3 days too late. A man named Walter Briggs, 51 years old, innocent of everything except being in the wrong place when I made the worst call of my career. 3 months in a cell waiting for me to figure out what I had gotten wrong. His heart gave out on a Tuesday morning in October, and I resigned the following Friday, and I had been moving ever since. 3 years of empty roads and forgettable towns. 3 years of keeping my head down and my conscience buried somewhere back in Kansas. I told myself I was looking for something. Mostly I think I was just moving away from that look on a widow's face in a courthouse doorway. The way she had looked at me and said nothing. The way she had taken her 2 boys by the hand and walked away without a single word because there was nothing left worth saying. I had been in Nevada for 4 days when it happened. The trail was empty in both directions, the July heat pressing down on everything like a flat iron, the sage standing still in air that had forgotten how to move. My horse, a big gray quarter horse I'd bought in Reno 6 weeks earlier, was the only living thing in any direction that seemed comfortable with the silence. Then I heard it, a child's voice, thin as wire, cutting straight through the desert wind. "Mister, please, my mama will not wake up." I pulled the gray to a stop, looked down the trail, saw the wagon listing hard to the left, one wheel shattered against a boulder that had no business being that close to the road. The canvas cover was half ripped away. The horse that had been pulling it was gone. I told myself I would just check, just make sure the situation was what it appeared to be. I had told myself a lot of things over the past 3 years. I dismounted. The little girl was sitting in the dirt beside the broken wheel, her knees pulled to her chest, both arms wrapped around a cloth bundle like it was the most important thing left in the world. She could not have been more than 8 years old. Her dress was torn at the hem, her boots were 2 sizes too big, and she was looking at me with eyes that had already seen more than any child her age should have to see. I stopped 10 feet away. Old habit. Read the situation before walking into it. "My name is Cole," I said, keeping my voice low. "That your mama inside the wagon?" The girl nodded. She did not cry. That was the part that hit me hardest. She had gone past crying. She was just waiting. "She breathing?" I asked. "Yes, sir, but she will not open her eyes. She will not answer me." The girl's chin trembled once. Then it went still. She told me to wait for a good man. She said I would know him by whether he looked at me when he talked to me. I looked at her when she said that. I held her gaze and did not look away. "What is your name?" I asked. "Lily," she said. "Lily Voss." "All right, Lily. Let me take a look at your mama." Inside the wagon, the woman was lying on a thin blanket, one arm across her chest, dark hair stuck to her face with sweat. Late 20s, maybe early 30s, lean and sunburned. Breathing shallow but steady. Dried blood at her left temple, not fresh. 6 or 7 hours old. I checked her pulse. Strong enough. Checked her pupils the way an old field doctor had taught me years before. Uneven. That meant a blow to the head. That meant she needed more than shade and water. I stood back up and looked at Lily. How long has she been like this? Since this morning, Lily said. We were on the road before sunrise. The wheel hit the rock and Mama fell from the seat. I tried to wake her. I gave her water. I kept my hat over her face for the sun. You did good, I said. You did real good, Lily. She looked at me the way children looked at adults when they were deciding whether to believe something. Then she held out the cloth bundle. Mama made me promise, she said. She said if something happened to her, I was to give this to the most honest man who stopped. She said I would know him by whether he looked at me when he talked. I did not reach for the bundle immediately. I had not given her any reason to trust me yet, and I knew it. I have not earned that yet, I said. Lily tilted her head. No. But you said I did good, and you looked at me when you said it. She held the bundle out further. I took it. It was heavier than I expected. Inside the cloth was a metal box, small, the kind used for keeping important papers safe from fire and flood. Old brass lock, well maintained. And on the corner a small scratch mark shaped like a crescent moon. Something went cold in my chest. I had seen that mark before. I could not immediately place where. What is inside, I asked. Is inside? Lily said, I do not know. Mama never told me. She just said it was the reason people were after us. I went very still. People are after you. Lily nodded. 2 men followed us out of Redstone. Mama saw them about a mile back and drove the wagon off the main trail. That is when we hit the rock. I looked down the trail in both directions. Empty. But empty trails filled up fast in this country, and I knew it. How far to the nearest town? Millhaven, Lily said, maybe 8 miles west. I slipped the box inside my coat and looked at the girl. Then I went to work getting her mother onto my horse. The woman came back to consciousness hard and fast, the way people did when they had been fighting their way toward it for hours. She grabbed my arm with both hands, and her voice came out low and certain even before her eyes had fully focused. Get away from me. She was already trying to pull herself off the horse, already calculating, already reaching for something at her hip that was not there anymore. Mama. Lily appeared immediately at her side. This is Cole. He stopped for us. He passed the test. The woman swung her eyes to me like a rifle being leveled. Green eyes, sharp as broken glass, taking in everything about me in one long sweep. The coat, the gun at my hip, the worn mark on my chest where a badge used to sit. You are a lawman, she said. Was, I said. What changed? I met her eyes and held them. I found out the law and justice are not always the same thing. Something moved behind those green eyes, a calculation, a memory. She did not thank me. She did not soften. But she stopped trying to get off the horse. My name is Sarah Voss, she said. And before you ask why I was on that road alone with a child in a locked box, you should know that the answer is complicated and involves people who will not be pleased to find us talking. I know, I said. 2 riders, your daughter told me. Maybe more by now. Sarah looked at me steadily. Then where are you taking us? Millhaven, I said. You have someone there you can trust? Ada Whitmore, she said. The boarding house on Mill Street. All right, then we move. And that was how it began. Not with a choice I felt good about. Not with any certainty that I was doing the right thing. Just with a child's voice in the desert and a box with a crescent moon scratch on its corner, and a woman who looked at me like I was a problem she had not yet solved. I had been in worse situations. I was having trouble remembering when. We made 3 miles before Sarah insisted on riding her own horse. I had found the animal 200 yards off the trail, tangled in scrub brush and irritated about it. A good solid mare, dark brown, built for distance. Sarah swung onto her back before I could offer to help, and if the effort cost her something in terms of the pain in her head, she did not let it show. We rode in silence for a while. Lily sat in front of me on the gray, and she sat the way some children sat on horses, like she had been doing it since before she could walk. easy and balanced, her small hands resting on the saddle horn, her eyes moving across the landscape the same way her mother's did, watching, cataloging. After about a mile, Lily said quietly, "Mr. Cole, you were a lawman. You hold that box the way Papa used to hold his land papers." I looked down at the coat where the box sat against my ribs. "Used to be," I said. "Why did you stop?" "It is a long story," I said. Lily considered this. "We have 5 miles," she said. That made me almost smile. I have not almost smiled in a while. "I will tell you some of it later," I said. "Right now I need to think." She accepted this with the gravity of someone receiving a genuine promise rather than a polite brush-off. "All right," she said. "I will hold you to that." We stopped at a dry creek bed about 2 miles from Millhaven to water the horses and let Sarah rest for 20 minutes whether she wanted to or not. I set a small fire, more for the normalcy of it than the warmth, and produced dried beef and hardtack from my saddlebag. Sarah sat with her back against a cottonwood and ate without comment. Her color was better than it had been an hour ago, but her eyes were doing the thing injured people's eyes did, drifting slightly before she caught them and pulled them back. "Tell me about the box," I said. She looked at me over the fire. "I need to know what I am carrying," I said. "And more importantly, I need to know who is going to come looking for it." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Lily, who had curled up on the other side of the fire, with her head on a folded blanket, and was either asleep or doing a convincing impression of it. "My husband built our ranch from bare ground," Sarah said, 12 years ago. He surveyed the land himself, filed the proper deeds, paid every fee, 300 acres in Redstone Valley, good water, good soil. She paused. 2 years ago, a man named Judge Aldrich Crane started buying up land in the valley, offering prices that sounded generous until you realized the land was worth 3 times what he was offering. Most people took the money and left. My husband Thomas said no. I waited. 6 months after he said no, Thomas died. The deputy called it a riding accident. Thomas had been riding horses since he was 4 years old. He did not fall. "No," I said. "I do not suppose he did." After Thomas died, Crane's men came with papers. Said Thomas had signed the land over just before he died. Said the deed transfer had gone through during his final business dealings. Sarah's jaw tightened. "My husband never signed anything like that. I know his handwriting. I know his signature. Thomas Calloway would have burned that ranch to the ground before he signed it over to Crane. So someone forged it. Someone forged it. But I could not prove it because the original deed papers, the ones Thomas filed himself, had disappeared from the county records office." I looked at the box. "Last month," she continued, "an old man named Edmund Gray came to my back door after midnight. He had worked at the county office for 30 years. He said he had kept personal copies of the original filings, not just mine. A dozen families' worth. He gave them to you. He said he was dying and could not go to that with the kind of silence he had been carrying." She paused. "He was dead within 2 weeks. They called it a heart seizure." I was quiet for a moment. "And Marshal Pryor has been watching you since." Sarah looked at me. "How do you know Pryor's name?" "I have been in Nevada 4 days," I said. "In 4 days I have heard his name 3 times. None of the stories ended well for the other person." Sarah nodded slowly. "Pryor does Crane's work," she said. "And Crane is the circuit judge for Redstone Valley. He is the law." I turned the box over in my hands. Firelight caught the crescent moon scratch at the corner. "This proves the deeds were forged," I said. "Not just mine. Every family Crane pushed out. Every acre he stole. Every forged signature and paid-off official going back 18 years. If those papers reach a federal judge in Carson City, Crane loses everything. And if they do not reach a federal judge." I looked at her. "You and Lily are the only people left who know they exist." Sarah held my gaze and did not flinch. "Yes." I turned the box over one more time. Sat with that for a minute. Then Lily spoke from across the fire, eyes still closed. She was not asleep. She said quietly, "Mr. Cole, do you know where my papa is?" The question landed like a stone in still water. I went carefully still. "No, miss, I do not." "I know he is dead," Lily said, in the matter-of-fact way children sometimes had about the things that hurt them most. "I just wondered if you knew where people go." After. I did not have an answer. It was the first time in a long while that I had been asked something I genuinely could not find words for. Sarah reached across and put her hand on Lily's arm. The two of them were quiet together. I looked away. It felt like something private. I did not sleep much that night. I sat with the box across my knees and the fire dying down, and thought about crescent moon scratches and forged signatures, and the particular cost of arriving 3 days too late to something that mattered. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I turned the box over and looked at that scratch mark again. I had seen it before. The memory was just out of reach, the way memories were when they were attached to something you had been trying not to think about. By the time it came to me, the fire had gone to coals. I had seen that scratch on a desk in Abilene. On the desk of the man who had run the land acquisition case I had been investigating when everything went wrong. The case that had collapsed and taken Walter Briggs with it. I set the box down carefully. I told myself it was coincidence. I had been telling myself a lot of things for 3 years. We rode into Millhaven from the north the following morning, moving slow, nothing about us designed to draw attention. The town was mid-morning busy, women between the dry goods store and the milliner, a handful of horses at the hitching posts, a couple of men outside the saloon doing nothing in particular with great dedication, normal and ordinary, which in my experience was sometimes just a lid sitting loose on something ugly. I watched the deputy's office as we passed it one street over, door closed. I watched the faces of the men outside the saloon. One of them looked at Sarah, and his eyes stayed a half-second too long before moving away. I filed that and kept riding. Ada Whitmore's boarding house was a 2-story white frame building with a wraparound porch and a painted sign above the door that had weathered several Nevada winters with dignity. We tied the horses at the back, away from the street, and went in through the kitchen door. Ada herself opened it before Sarah could knock. She was a large woman, maybe 60, with white hair pinned back and dark eyes that moved fast and saw everything. She looked at Sarah's temple, at the dried blood and the swelling, and her expression moved through grief and fury in about half a second before it locked down into something practical. "Get inside," she said. "All 3 of you." She looked at me with the same rapid assessment. "You are not from here." "No, ma'am." "Good. That means Pryor does not own any part of you yet." She closed the door and dropped the latch. Ada sat Sarah at the kitchen table and began cleaning the wound with the efficiency of someone who had done this before and not always under peaceful circumstances. Sarah held still for it with her back straight and her hands flat on the table and her eyes moving to Lily every 30 seconds. "They came to my door this morning," Ada said, not looking up from what she was doing. "2 of Pryor's men said they were concerned about your welfare." Sarah's voice was dry as the desert outside. "Dex Pryor has never been concerned about anyone's welfare but Crane's." "That is what I thought." Ada sat back and examined her work. "I told them I had not seen you and offered coffee. They did not stay." There was a pause. Then Sarah said, "Ada, it is time. I have the papers." Ada's hands went still. She looked at Sarah with an expression that was half relief and half terror. The look of someone who had been waiting for a moment for a long time and was now discovering they were not entirely sure they were ready for it. "Garrett's papers," Ada said quietly. "All of them," Sarah said. She glanced at me. "We are riding to Carson City, but Pryor is already looking and we need to move before dark." Ada stood. She started moving around the kitchen with the focused efficiency of a woman who expressed care through action. She packed dried beef, hard biscuits, 2 full canteens, a bedroll for Lily. She went to the pantry and came back with a canvas bag that clinked softly when she set it on the table. Ammunition, she said to me. I kept Thomas Voss's rifle cartridges here after they came and took his gun from the property. Seemed wrong to let them have everything. I looked at the bag, then at Ada. You have been waiting for someone to take this somewhere it could actually land. I have been waiting for someone worth giving it to, she said simply. She looked between me and Sarah with the expression of a woman who had been observing people long enough to read things that had not been said yet. Father Obi wants to see you, she said. The old church east of town. Tonight. He sent word this morning. Obi knows we are here? Sarah asked. Obi knows everything, Ada said. He always has. I spent the next hour doing something I had been putting off since the night before. I took the box to the corner of Ada's kitchen, away from the others, and asked Sarah for the key. She produced it from inside her collar, small brass key on a cord worn against her skin. I opened the box. I read methodically, the way I had always read case documents. Thomas Voss's original deed filing first. Clean paper, precise handwriting. The work of a careful man who had measured every inch of his land himself and trusted the system to honor that work. Then the other families, 11 in total. Each original filing legitimate, each subsequent transfer document a forgery so well executed that a cursory examination would have passed it, but not a thorough one. I had been a federal investigator for 9 years. I knew what forged documents looked like when you knew what to look for. I worked through the stack carefully. Then I reached the 7th document. I read it once. Then I read it again. I set it on the table and looked at it for a long moment without picking it up. Cole Harden, Special Investigator, Abilene District. Certifying investigation of land transfer. Found compliant. Signed and dated March 14th, 1879. I had never signed that paper. I had never been to Nevada in 1879. But the signature was mine. Or close enough to mine that I could not have distinguished it without knowing for a fact that I had not written it. I sat with that for 30 seconds. Then I closed the box and stood up and walked to where Sarah was sitting with Ada. I need to show you something, I said. Sarah looked at my face, then she stood up. I laid the document on the table between us. She read it. I watched the color leave her face in stages. Then she looked up at me and her voice was very quiet and very cold. Explain. I sat down across from her. Then I told her about Abilene, all of it. The case, the wrong arrest, Walter Briggs, the 3 months, the heart that gave out in the cell, the widow in the courthouse doorway, the resignation, the 3 years of moving. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, Lily, who had been sitting quietly in the corner with a biscuit, said without looking up, "Did you write your name on that paper, Mr. Cole?" "No," I said. Lily nodded once. "Then someone is trying to make you look guilty. Papa said that is what dishonest people do when they cannot beat honest ones." There was a silence. Sarah was looking at the document, not at me. After a long moment, she said, "I do not trust you, but I need you. And right now, those 2 things will have to coexist." "That is fair," I said. "It is not fair," she said. "It is necessary. There is a difference. I accepted that. It was honest, and I had learned over 3 years to value honest above comfortable." "What do you want to do?" I asked. She looked toward the window, toward the street where Pryor's man had stood outside the saloon with his eyes a half-second too long on her face. "We go to see Father Obi tonight," she said, "and then we ride for Carson City." She picked up the document with my name on it and looked at it one more time. "And we find out who put your name in this box," she said. "And why?" We spent the afternoon at Ada's, resting and preparing. Lily slept for 3 hours in an upstairs room and came back down steadier and quieter, the way children came back from sleep when they had been running on empty for too long. She sat at the kitchen table with Ada and listened to everything without asking to be excluded. Ada did not suggest she leave. Some children had earned their seat at the table. I used the time to study the town from Ada's kitchen window. Millhaven was not a large town, maybe 400 people. 1 main street, a saloon, a dry goods store, a small church, and the kind of low, flat buildings that towns in this part of Nevada built, because they had not yet decided if they were planning to stay. At 2 in the afternoon, I saw Judge Aldrich Crane for the first time. He came down the main street on a tall black horse, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, and he moved through the town the way certain men moved through places where they were used to being respected. He stopped outside the dry goods store, shook hands with 3 men in succession, said something that made all 3 of them laugh, tipped his hat at a woman crossing the street, smiled at a child who was standing on the boardwalk watching him. Every person he spoke to smiled back. Nobody looked afraid. That was the most dangerous kind of man, not the kind who frightened people, the kind who made people feel safe, right up until the moment he did not need them to feel that way anymore. He looked briefly at Ada's boarding house. His eyes moved across the front of the building without stopping. Then he rode on. I stepped back from the window. Ada was beside me. She had seen it too. "He knows," she said quietly. "He suspects," I said, which is the same thing. "We need to move after dark." Ada nodded. She went back to packing. I found Sarah in the small back room where she had been resting, sitting up on the edge of a cot with Thomas's letter from Edmund Gray open in her hands. She folded it quickly when I came in, but not before I had seen what it was. "I am sorry," I said. "I should have knocked. It is all right." She tucked the letter back into her coat. "What is it?" "Crane just rode through town." He looked at the building. Sarah absorbed this. "How long do we have? Until dark, maybe." "Till dark. Then it gets less predictable." She stood up. "Then we make the most of the afternoon." We sat across from each other in the small room and went through the box document by document together. She explained each family's situation. I catalogued the pattern of forgeries, the dates, the names of the notaries who had signed off on transfers that should never have been certified. It was meticulous, ugly work. The work of a man who had spent 18 years building an empire, one stolen acre at a time. At some point, Lily appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee that Ada had sent. She set them on the floor between us with great seriousness, and then retreated without being asked. Sarah watched her go. Something moved across her face. "She has not cried since Thomas died," Sarah said. "Not once. Not that I have seen." "She is carrying it differently," I said. Sarah looked at me. "How would you know?" I thought about that. "Because she asks questions," I said. "People who cry are releasing something. People who ask questions are trying to understand something. She is trying to understand where her father went and why the world allowed it. That is a harder kind of grief." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "That is an unusually perceptive thing to say." "I used to be good at reading people," I said. "Before Abilene." "What happened to that after Abilene?" "I stopped trusting my own reads," I said. "It is hard to use a skill you do not believe in anymore." Sarah looked at me with an expression I could not entirely categorize. It was not sympathy exactly. It was more like the recognition of one person who had been damaged in a specific way for another person who had been damaged in a different specific way. She picked up her coffee cup. "Father Obi will have answers," she said. "He usually does. And if he does not, then we ride with what we have and trust that it is enough." She said it flatly, not with bravado, just with the particular quality of a woman who had run out of alternatives and had made her peace with that. We went to the old church at 9 that night, after Lily was settled at Ada's with Ada's word that she would not open the door for anyone wearing a badge. The church was small and dark and smelled of candle wax and dry wood. Father Obadiah Cross was waiting inside, a lamp burning on the table in front of him. He was 68 years old, white-bearded, with the posture of a man who had spent decades on horseback, and the eyes of a man who had spent those same decades watching people make their worst decisions. He looked at Sarah first, then at me. He looked at me for a long time. "I know who you are," he said. "I have been praying you would come, and I have been afraid that you would." Father Obi poured coffee from a pot on the small stove in the corner of the church and set cups in front of us without asking whether we wanted any. Then he sat down across the table and folded his hands and began to speak. He told us about Crane's operation in specific, careful detail, the families who had sold, the 3 who had refused and seen their barns catch fire within the same month, the way the county records office had been quietly compromised over a period of years, one clerk at a time, until Edmund Gray was the last honest man in a dishonest system. He talked about Gray, the decades of silence, the slow erosion of a man who had started out with good intentions and found himself year by year too deep to climb out of. He came to my Sunday service his last month, Obie said quietly. He could barely walk by then. He told me what he had kept and where it was going. I gave him what absolution I could and told him the courage he had found at the end was worth something. I meant it. He paused. Then he looked at Sarah. And then he looked at me. There is something else, he said. Something I have carried for 18 months and was not sure I had the right to tell. He unfolded his hands, placed them flat on the table. Thomas Voss did not die because Crane ordered it directly. Thomas died because he was riding to meet someone, a man he believed could help him, a federal investigator he had read about in the territorial papers, a man with a record of taking cases that other investigators avoided. The lamplight did not move. The silence did. That man's name was Cole Hardin, Obie said. Thomas had written to him twice. He had received no reply because by the time those letters arrived in Abilene, Hardin had already resigned. Thomas did not know that. He rode out to make the meeting anyway. Pryor's men were watching the road. They followed him. I heard Sarah set her coffee cup down very carefully on the table. Obie continued. Pryor did not kill Thomas himself. He has told me as much, and I believe him. He blocked the road. He meant for Thomas to turn back. Crane sent other men behind Pryor without Pryor knowing. By the time Pryor understood what had happened, it was done. The church was completely quiet. Sarah stood up. She did it slowly and without drama. She looked at neither me nor Obie. She walked to the church door and went outside. I moved to follow. Obie's hand touched my arm. Give her a moment, he said. I sat back down. We were silent for what felt like a long time. Obie reached inside his coat and produced an envelope. Old, creased, the paper softened by handling. A postmark from Abilene. Thomas sent this to the federal office, Obie said. They did not know where to forward it after you resigned. It found its way to me through a circuit rider 3 months ago. I have been holding it, waiting for the right moment. He set it on the table between us. I think this is the right moment, he said. I picked up the envelope, opened it carefully. Thomas Voss's handwriting was precise and unhurried, the handwriting of a man who did not write letters often but took the ones he wrote seriously. He had written, Mr. Hardin, I do not know you. I have read about your work in the territorial papers, and I believe you are the kind of man who can be trusted with something difficult. I am asking you to help me protect my family. If something happens to me before you receive this, please find Sarah Voss in Redstone Valley and make sure she and my daughter Lily are safe. That is all I am asking. I believe you are the kind of man who stops when others keep riding. I am trusting that belief. Thomas Voss. I read it twice. Then I sat with it for a moment. When Sarah came back through the door, she sat down across from me without looking at either of us. Her face was composed, her eyes were clear. She had taken her moment and used it well. I would like to read you something, I said, if you will let me. She looked at me. Then she nodded. I read Thomas's letter aloud. I kept my voice steady. It took some effort. When I finished, the church was quiet enough that I could hear the lamp flame moving in the slight draft from the door. Sarah's hands were flat on the table. They curled slowly into fists, then released. She did not reach for me. I did not reach for her. I turned my palm up on the table. Just that. An open hand with no demand attached to it. She looked at it for a long time. She did not take it, but she did not look away from it either. And in that moment, in that lamplight, in that small church that smelled of candle wax and 30 years of other people's grief. I understood that this was what trust looked like at its very beginning. Not warmth, not softness, just the decision not to leave. Obi spoke quietly. There is one more thing. He told us about Agent Silas Ford, a federal land fraud investigator from Sacramento. Had been building the case against Crane for 2 years. Was in Carson City now, waiting. Those papers, Obi said, looking at the box, will not be arriving into silence. They will be arriving into an active federal investigation. The match, as it were, meeting the powder. He paused. It also means Crane knows the inquiry exists. He is running out of time. That is why Pryor is moving now. A cornered man acts faster and thinks less. Sarah looked at the box, then at me. "One day," she said quietly. "We have one day, before Crane does something that cannot be undone." "Then we ride tonight," I said. She nodded. "Tonight." We rode back to Ada's and left within the hour. Lily was awake, dressed and ready before we reached the top of the stairs. She had packed her own small bag and tied it herself. Ada walked us to the back gate. She pressed the canvas bag of ammunition into my hands. She turned to Sarah and pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace, the kind between women who did not know each other perfectly, but knew enough. "Come back when it is over," Ada said. Sarah held on for exactly 1 second. Then she stepped back and turned toward the horse, and did not look back. We rode out of Millhaven at midnight. 4 people and 2 horses moving north through the dark toward Carson City. And somewhere behind us, in the direction of Redstone, the sound of other horses began to drift through the Nevada air. We were an hour out of Millhaven when the trouble found us. Lily heard them first. She was sitting in front of me on the gray, half asleep, when she came alert all at once the way children did when something changed in the air around them. "Someone is behind us," she said. Quiet, but certain. I had already heard it. A rhythm in the ground beneath us, steady, purposeful. "Obi," I said. "Already thinking it," he said. "Canyon cut half a mile north. Single file only, but it comes out on the high plateau. There is a dry wash on the far side that Pryor's men will not know." "How sure are you?" "I have been riding this valley for 11 years, he said. "I am sure." We moved. The canyon entrance was a narrow slot between 2 walls of red rock, barely wide enough for a horse if the rider kept their knees in. The sound of pursuit faded as we dropped into it. The walls absorbed sound and trapped shadow, and for a few minutes the world contracted to the width of the rock on either side and the ground beneath our horses' feet. Lily had gone very still in front of me. I felt it before I saw it, the slight trembling of her small shoulders. I had been watching her be brave for 3 days. It was the first time I had seen her be 8. I shifted my coat forward, wrapping it around her without saying anything. The trembling slowed, then stopped. She did not say thank you. She did not need to. We were halfway through the canyon when a single horse came out of a side cut ahead of us, moving slow, hands visible. I had my gun out before the thought finished. "I am not drawing on you," the rider said. His voice was flat and tired. Not road tired, the other kind. Dex Pryor. He sat his horse in the narrow canyon and looked at me with the expression of a man who had arrived at the end of a very long calculation. "I came alone," he said. "No men behind me. I rode ahead when I saw which way you were going." Sarah said, "Then what do you want?" Pryor looked at her. Something in his face was not what I had expected from a man who had been running people off their land for a decade. He asked to speak with me privately, 10 feet away from the others in the dark canyon. I rode those 10 feet and stopped. He said, "I owe Crane a debt, a real one. He pulled me out of a flooding river in '71. I was 22 years old and I had no reason to keep going. And he pulled me out anyway. I have been paying that debt ever since." I said nothing. Let him keep talking. I did not understand what I was signing up for at the beginning. He paused. By the time I understood, I had done enough that I could not walk away clean. He looked at his hands on the reins. "Thomas Voss, I need you to know something about that. I blocked the road." I meant to turn him back. I did not know Crane had sent other men behind me. By the time I understood what had happened, he stopped. I read him the way I used to read men in courtrooms, long and careful, and looking for the specific quality of a lie versus the specific quality of a true thing being said badly. "I believe you," I said, "and it does not make you innocent." "I know," he said. "Then here is what I will say once," I said. "When this is over, if you come forward as a witness, I will make sure that matters to whoever is making decisions about what happens to you. That is all I can offer." Pryor looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "That is more than I deserve." He turned his horse and rode back the way he had come, into the dark, without another word. I rode back to the others. Sarah looked at me with a question in her eyes. "Later," I said. She accepted that. We came out of the canyon onto the high plateau and picked up the dry wash Obi had mentioned. It ran northeast for almost 2 miles before it joined a wider trail that angled toward Carson City. We had been riding for about an hour when Lily said, "Cole?" "Yeah," I said. "Are you scared?" I thought about lying. I thought about the comfortable reassurance that adults gave children when the truth was inconvenient. Then I thought about who Lily Voss was and what she had survived. "Yes," I said. A pause. "Papa said brave was not the same as not scared. He said it was deciding something mattered more than the fear." "Your papa was a smart man," I said. "I think you would have liked each other," Lily said. That landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there. I did not answer her. Some things you just held. Behind me, in the dark, I heard Sarah make a small sound. Not quite words, not quite breath. Something between the two. We rode in silence after that. It was around the 2nd hour, when the lights of Carson City were beginning to show on the horizon, that Sarah pulled her horse alongside mine. She reached out in the dark and touched my arm, just her hand on my sleeve, just for a moment, then gone. She did not explain it. I did not ask. I felt it for the rest of the ride. We came into Carson City from the south just before dawn, moving through back streets on Obi's guidance, keeping to the shadows of buildings, away from the lit windows of the saloons where men gathered and word moved faster than horses. The federal building was on the north side of the main square. 2 stories, solid, a lamp burning above the side door. I dismounted and looked at that lamp. Then I looked at Sarah. "Stay close," I said. She looked back at me. For the first time in 3 days, she did not argue. I knocked on the side door. The man who opened the door was in his late 40s, lean, with a clerk's build and the kind of sharp, tired eyes that came from doing close work in bad light for too long. He still had his coat on despite the hour. He had been expecting someone. He looked at me and went very still. "Hardin," he said, flat, unreadable. "Ford," I said. "I was not expecting it to be you. Agent Silas Ford." I had heard the name twice during my time in the Abilene district. We had never met directly. But I knew his reputation. Thorough, patient, not a man who made mistakes. He stepped back from the door to let us in. The office was a single lamp-lit room with 2 desks pushed together and papers covering most of both surfaces. Organized papers. The kind that had been worked over many times. 18 months of careful work, visible in the density of the stacks. Ford looked at Sarah. "Mrs. Voss, I have been hoping you would make it." Sarah set the box on the cleared surface of his desk. She did not sit. She stood and explained what the box contained in precise, unhurried terms. No pleading, no drama, just evidence. Ford read with rapid professional focus, cross-referencing against materials already spread across his desk. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The room was quiet except for the sound of papers turning. Finally, Ford looked up. "This is everything I needed to complete the chain of evidence," he said. "With these documents and the federal inquiry on record, Crane cannot protect himself. His deed transfers are provably forged. His notary records are fabricated. The timeline of Pryor's movements on the day Thomas Voss died is documentable. He looked at Sarah directly. I can have warrants issued by 9 tomorrow morning. Sarah received this the way she received everything, with the stillness of someone who had been braced so long that the body did not know immediately what to do with the absence of pressure. She pressed her lips together. Her hands came up and she pressed them against her face for just a moment. One breath. Then she lowered them and her face was composed and forward and clear. Tomorrow morning, she said. Tomorrow morning, Ford confirmed. Then he said, Hardin, I need a word with you. He looked at Sarah. She took Lily to the outer room without comment, which told me she trusted the moment enough to give it room. Ford set a second folder on the desk. Older, worn at the edges. I was the investigator assigned to review the Abilene case after your resignation, he said. I wrote the report that recommended the resignation be accepted and that no further action be taken against you. I did it because I believed you had been negligent, that Walter Briggs died because of your judgment. I did not move. 6 months after you resigned, Ford continued, I found something I had missed, evidence that the witness testimony in the Briggs case had been coordinated, not by chance. The man who arranged it had ties to a land acquisition network operating across 4 territories. He slid a document across the desk. A network I subsequently identified as Crane's. You were set up, Hardin. Abilene was a removal. You were getting close to something connected to Crane's operation in Nevada, and they needed you gone. The guilt you have been carrying for 3 years does not belong to you. It belongs to them. I looked at the document on the desk. I did not speak for a long time. I turned to the window and looked at Carson City beginning to come alive in the early light, the first pale gray of dawn touching the edges of the buildings. 3 years. Every mile of road I had put between myself and Abilene. Every night I had sat with Walter Briggs' face in my head and told myself I had no right to anything better than movement and distance. It did not fix anything. Walter Briggs was still dead. His boys were still growing up without a father. But the shape of what I had been carrying changed, and I stood at that window and let it change. Sarah was in the doorway. She had not stayed in the outer room. She had heard everything. I turned and found her there. She did not say anything about what she had heard. She looked at me, and there was nothing in her eyes that was measuring me against a standard I might fail. Ford said, I have the authority to deputize a federal witness escort. Your background qualifies you. This is the part where I ask if you want it back. He set a badge on the desk. I looked at it. I looked at Sarah. She gave me nothing, waited for me to decide for myself. I picked up the badge. Ford allowed himself one small expression. I will have 2 federal marshals here within the hour, he said. There is a secure room upstairs. Keep the lamps low. He went to his inner office to send the messages. Sarah and I stepped out onto the narrow side porch. The city was waking up around us. Somewhere a horse was being harnessed. Somewhere a door opened and closed. Cole, she said. First time without the mister. I turned. We were closer than I realized, the porch being small. She looked up at me and did not finish whatever she had started to say. Just looked at me. I raised my hand. My thumb traced her cheekbone just once. Just barely there. She did not move away. She did not close her eyes. She looked at me like she was deciding something that mattered more than anything that had been decided in the past 3 days. Ford's voice from inside. Hardin, I need your signature before we proceed. I lowered my hand, stepped back inside. Sarah stayed on the porch. I heard her exhale behind me, slow and long, like someone setting something down after carrying it a very long distance. I signed Ford's papers. I did not let my hand shake. That was the best I could do. It was enough. The night before, the warrants held its breath. 2 federal marshals arrived at 11 broad-shouldered men with the particular economy of movement that came from spending years doing difficult things in small spaces. They set up watch on the building's 2 entries and said almost nothing, which was what I wanted from them. Sarah and Lily were in the secure room upstairs. I could hear Lily's voice occasionally through the ceiling, asking questions, and Sarah's quieter voice answering them. At some point, the voices stopped, which meant Lily had finally slept. I was at the front window at midnight when the messenger arrived. Well-dressed, unhurried, carrying an envelope addressed to Ford and copied to me. Crane's letter was polite and measured, and colder than the Nevada air outside. He wrote that he had always had the highest regard for federal authority, that he trusted any proper investigation would find the records in question to be entirely in order, that he looked forward to the opportunity to demonstrate this in the appropriate venue. It was the letter of a man who believed he still had options. I was at the window at 6 in the morning when Crane arrived. He came with 8 men spread across the front of the building. He himself rode to the center, dismounted with the unhurried ease of a man who had never in his life arrived anywhere and found the situation more than he could manage. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed even at this hour, the kind of composed that took decades to build. He looked up at the building and then he looked directly at the window where I was standing. He waited. I went downstairs. Ford was already at the front door with the 2 marshals flanking him. I stood one step behind Ford with the badge on my chest and my hand at my side near my hip but not on the gun. Ford opened the door. "Mr. Hardin," Crane said. His voice was easy and pleasant, the voice of a man at a social occasion. "I have heard a great deal about you. It is a shame we are meeting under circumstances like these." "Judge Crane," I said, "I have heard a great deal about you as well." He smiled. Then he said, "I wonder if we might speak privately. I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding regarding some county records, and I am confident that a direct conversation between reasonable men could resolve it efficiently." "I am sure you are," I said. His eyes moved to the badge on my chest, then back to my face. "A man of your abilities," he said, "is wasted on errand work. I have connections in Sacramento. Good connections. The kind that could restore a career that has been, through no fault of your own, derailed." "Thank you," I said. "No." The pleasantness did not leave his face, but something behind his eyes sharpened. He tried a different angle, the Abilene angle. "A man who made the kind of error you made in Abilene," he said carefully, "might be grateful for an opportunity to rebuild quietly, without the scrutiny of a public proceeding." I held his gaze. "I have made my peace with Abilene." Something flickered behind those composed eyes, a rapid recalculation. Then Dex Pryor rode up from the South Street. He came alone, dismounted at the edge of the group, walked through Crane's men without stopping. His eyes did not meet Crane's. Crane said, "Dex, what are you doing?" Pryor did not look at him. He kept walking toward the building's side door. "Paying a debt," Pryor said quietly, "a real one, not yours." He went inside. For the first time, something moved in Crane's composed face. Not panic, not yet, but the first hairline crack in something that had never been tested this directly before. His hand tightened on his horse's bridle. Ford stepped forward and read the warrants. He read them in the clear morning air with the particular measured cadence of a man who had been building toward this moment for a long time. 14 counts of land fraud and document falsification. 2 counts of conspiracy, 1 count of murder in the death of Thomas Voss. Crane stood very still through all of it. One of his men turned his horse and rode away without a word. Then another, the calculation visible in the movement. Crane looked at what remained of his morning and understood the arithmetic. He looked at me one last time. "This is not finished," he said. "No," I said. "But you are." The marshal stepped forward. Crane did not resist. His composure held even then, the discipline of a man who had decided that whatever came next, he would face it in the manner to which he had become accustomed. The wagon moved away down the street. I looked up at the window of the secure room. Lily's small face appeared in the glass, looking down at the street below. "Is it over, Cole?" she called down. "Almost, Lily," I said. "Almost." I stood in the street a moment longer. Then I put my hand briefly against the wall of the federal building, just for a second, just to feel something solid. Then I went back inside. Ford took me aside at 7 in the morning, before Sarah was awake. He told me that Crane had retained lawyers from San Francisco overnight. Experienced men. The documents would hold, Ford was confident of that, but authentication through proper federal channels took time. Crane was applying for bond pending the formal proceeding. It could be weeks before a ruling, possibly months. I stood in Ford's office and thought about how to tell Sarah. I found her in the small kitchen off the secure room, standing at the window with a cup of coffee, watching Carson City come to life in the morning light. She heard me come in and turned. I told her straight. No softening. No reassurance I could not back up. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. The coffee cup stayed in her hands, steady. Then she said, "Are you going to stay? Not, are you going to help? Not what happens next. Are you going to stay?" "Yes," I said. She nodded once, set the cup down. Then, "Tell me what we need to do." The formal session convened at 10. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table with her back straight and her hands folded on the table in front of her. Lily sat beside her in a chair that was slightly too large, feet not quite reaching the floor, watching everything with those old eyes of hers. I stood at the back of the room. Pryor's testimony was the centerpiece. He spoke for 40 minutes in the measured, specific voice of a man who had decided to put down something too heavy to keep carrying. He described Crane's operation in detail that only someone at its center could have provided. He described the night Thomas Voss died. He named names and dates and amounts. When he was done, the room was very quiet. The circuit judge reviewed Ford's submission, acknowledged the evidence, confirmed the warrants, and ordered the formal proceeding to begin. I watched Sarah receive the news. She did not collapse. She sat in her chair, and her throat moved once, and her eyes went briefly bright, and then she looked at her hands on the table and took a breath and looked up again, and her face was clear. It was the most I had ever seen a person hold at once. After the session, in the anteroom, Lily came to find me. She was holding a small envelope, old paper, the edges softened from handling. She held it out. "Papa left this for me," she said. "Not for Mama, for me." I looked at the envelope. "I have been waiting for the right time," Lily said. "How do you know now is the right time?" I asked. "Because everything Papa asked for is done," she said, "and you are still here." I took the envelope and opened it carefully. Thomas Voss had written in the same precise, unhurried hand as the letter Obi had given me. But this one had a different quality, more intimate. The voice of a man writing to someone he loved in the specific way a father loved a daughter. He had written, "Lily, by the time you read this, I hope things are better than they are right now. I hope your mama is safe. I hope you still remember the stars I showed you from the porch. I need to ask something of you, and I am sorry to ask it of someone so young. But you see things that other people miss. You always have, even before you could talk. Someday a man will stop when he did not have to. You will know him because he will look at you when he talks and will not look away when things get hard. When you find that man, give him this letter. Not before you are sure, but when you are sure, do not wait. Tell your mama I loved her every single day. Tell her that being loved by her was the best thing I ever did. And tell her it is all right to let someone good stay. Your Papa, Thomas." I stood in the anteroom and read that letter and understood what it had cost a dying man to write it, the faith it required, the willingness to trust in the goodness of strangers he would never meet. I stepped back to give Sarah the room. She read it twice, folded it carefully, pressed it against her chest for a moment with both hands. When she looked up, her eyes were clear. "He always knew things before I did," she said. Her voice was quiet and almost fond. She looked at me across the anteroom. Ford appeared in the doorway. He looked between us with the expression of a man who understood he was the least important person in the room. "Hardin," he said, "that position. Federal investigator, land fraud cases based in Nevada. The offer stands." "I will think about it," I said. He nodded and went back to his office and closed the door quietly behind him. Lily came and stood beside me. She reached up and took my hand the way she always did, small and certain. We walked out of the building together into the bright Nevada morning. We started back toward Redstone Valley 3 days later. 4 people and 2 horses on the Nevada flats in the afternoon light. Obi rode ahead of us, humming something nobody could quite make out. Lily walked between me and Sarah, and after about a mile she reached up and took Sarah's hand and walked a few steps, then reached up and took my hand and walked a few more. Nobody commented on this. Obi hummed louder. I looked at Lily's hand in mine, small with a scrape across the knuckles from somewhere in the canyon that she had never mentioned. I thought about Thomas putting his hands over hers to teach her to hold the reins. I thought about the fact that I was here, on this road, holding this hand, because a man I had never met had trusted a stranger, because a dying clerk had found his courage at the end, because a woman had decided that necessary and trust could coexist long enough to become something else. Obi pulled ahead to water his horse at a creek crossing, and for a quarter mile Sarah and I walked together without Lily between us, the girl having run ahead to ask Obi something about the stars. We walked in silence for a bit. Then Sarah said, "Ford's offer. Are you going to take it?" "I am considering it," I said. "It would keep you in Nevada." "It would." She looked ahead at the trail. The back fence line on the ranch is completely down. Thomas kept his fencing tools in the barn. Left side, second hook from the door. "That is useful information," I said. "The irrigation channel he dug needs clearing. 2 summers of debris in it. Probably a week of work at least. I know something about irrigation. The house needs the south window resealed before winter. The floor in the kitchen has a soft spot near the stove that Thomas was meaning to fix." She paused. "The work would take months, easily." "Months," I said, "at least." We walked another 50 steps in the Nevada wind moving through the sage. "Are you asking me to stay, Mrs. Voss?" I said. She said, "I am telling you where the tools are kept, Mr. Harden." And there it was, the most Sarah Voss thing I had ever heard, and I found myself smiling. Not the polite kind. Not the kind I used when I needed people to think I was all right, the real kind. The kind my face had almost forgotten how to make. She glanced at me when she heard it, and something shifted in her expression. A small thing, a warmth that had been building for 3 days finally reaching the surface. We reached the ranch as the light was going golden. The roofline appeared over the last ridge and Sarah went quiet. The house was standing, smaller than I had imagined it and more solid, built by a man who had meant it to last. The fence line was down on 3 sides. The back field had gone to weeds. The barn door hung open. It looked exactly like what it was, a place that had been waiting. And Sarah stopped at the gate. She stood there for a moment just looking. I stood beside her and did not speak and did not move ahead of her. This was hers. The moment belonged to her. After a while, she put her hand on the gate and opened it herself. Lily went through the front door at a run. The sound of small boots on hardwood floors moved through the house, room by room, her voice calling out from each one. "My bed is still here. The quilt Grandma made, the window that sticks." Each discovery reported back like a small victory. Sarah stood in the kitchen with her hand on the edge of the table. Thomas had built this. I could tell from the way she touched it. The particular reverence of someone handling something made by hands they missed. "It needs work," she said. "Everything does," I said. "That is not the same as beyond fixing." She looked at me, and this time she did not look away. There was nothing in her eyes measuring me against a possibility I might fail. Just her looking at me, steady and clear, in the kitchen of the house her husband had built and she had fought for, and they had together brought back from the edge of being lost. She said, "Is this to fix the fence, or are you staying?" "What is the difference as far as you are concerned?" I asked. "The fence eventually gets fixed and the man moves on," she said. "That is one thing. The other thing is different." "I know which thing I am offering," I said. Sarah said, "Say it plainly. I need to hear it plainly." I closed the distance between us to 1 step. I am staying, I said, not for the fence. For you and Lily and this ranch and whatever comes after that. I am done moving. She reached up and put her hand against my jaw. Her choice, her initiative, her hand. I covered it with mine. She stepped forward. I did not step back. I will not try to describe what came next, except to say it was quiet and real and nothing like the stories I had heard, and everything like what I had stopped believing was still possible somewhere around mile 500 out of Abilene. Lily found us in the kitchen a few minutes later. She looked at us with the composed assessment she brought to everything. Then she said, "I thought so," and went to find something to eat, and that was that. Obie settled in the barn for the night. I found him there an hour later, checking the horses and making himself useful the way old men did when they understood that their role in a particular story was nearly complete. We talked while I checked the fencing supplies stacked against the barn wall. He said, "Are you happy, son?" I thought about it genuinely before answering. "I think I am learning how to be," I said. "I think I forgot somewhere along the way." "That is the most honest answer I have heard in a year," Obie said. He looked at the barn ceiling for a moment. "Thomas would have liked you. He always said the best men were not the ones who never fell down. They were the ones who got back up and went looking for a way to make it right." I thought about that. "He made a good choice," I said, "trusting a stranger." "He did," Obie agreed. "And so did you." Lily found me at the back fence line as the sun was going down. She came and stood beside me, looking out at the broken posts and the weeds beyond. "Cole," she said. "Yeah, now that it is over. Do you think Papa can rest?" I crouched down to her level and looked at her. "I think your Papa did everything right," I said. "He loved your Mama. He kept his land honest. He trusted good people when he did not have to. He left a letter that did exactly what he needed it to do." Lily considered this with her usual seriousness. "Yeah," she said. "I think so too." She looked at the house. The kitchen light had come on. Sarah's shape moved behind the window, steady and warm in the lamplight. "Are you going to be here when I wake up tomorrow?" Lily asked. "Yes." "And the day after?" "Yes." She nodded, satisfied. She reached up and took my hand the way she always did, small and certain, and we walked back toward the light together. I stopped once, alone on the porch, before going in. The Nevada evening had settled into itself, the stars coming up clear and cold and endless in every direction, the dark land stretching away to the horizons. I reached into my coat and found Thomas Voss's letter, folded and worn at the creases from being taken out and put back too many times. I looked at it for a moment in the starlight. Thomas Voss had written to a stranger, had believed before he had any reason to believe it that the right man would stop, had trusted that faith forward into the dark and let it travel further than he ever would. I thought about the version of myself that had almost kept riding. That had nearly let a child's voice in the desert go unanswered. That had almost let Abilene be the last thing that defined me. I folded the letter and put it back where it had been. Then I turned around and looked through the kitchen window at the light inside. At Sarah moving in the lamplight. At Lily appearing beside her, tugging at her sleeve, saying something that made Sarah tip her head back and laugh. I had not heard her laugh before. Not once in all of it. Not through the desert and the canyon and the chase and the courtroom and all the hard miles between. It was the best sound I had ever heard. I opened the door and went inside. And this time I did not hesitate. All characters and situations in this book are fictional and developed for narrative purposes. The author does not intend to reflect or comment on any real individual or event. Readers should approach the story as a work of fiction, not as a factual account.
The story we have just witnessed is not merely a tale of dust roads, broken wagons, and men with guns. It is, at its heart, a quiet and powerful meditation on redemption, trust, and the courage to choose what is right when it would be far easier to walk away. At the center of the story stands Cole Hardin, a man who once believed in justice, lost that belief through a terrible mistake, and spent years running from the weight of his guilt. His journey across empty lands is not just physical, it is the journey of a man trying to outrun his own conscience. But as the story unfolds, we come to understand something important. No distance is ever far enough to escape the truth of who we are. The turning point comes with a simple moment, a child's voice in the desert. Cole could have kept riding. In fact, he had sworn he would. Yet something in him, perhaps buried but not broken, compels him to stop. And that decision, small as it may seem, changes everything. It reminds us that moral transformation often begins not with grand gestures, but with quiet choices. Lily, the young girl, represents innocence, but not a naive kind of innocence. She has suffered loss, yet she still believes in goodness. Her simple test, whether he looked at me when he talked, is profoundly symbolic. It suggests that honesty is not proven through words, but through presence, through the willingness to truly see another human being. In a world full of deception and corruption, this child becomes the moral compass of the story. Sarah, on the other hand, embodies resilience and strength. She does not trust easily, nor should she. Her journey teaches us that trust is not something freely given. It is something built slowly, often alongside doubt. The relationship between her and Cole shows that trust does not require certainty. Sometimes, it only requires the decision to stay. The story also explores justice, not the kind written in law books, but the kind rooted in truth and courage. Cole's past reveals a painful reality. The law and justice are not always the same. He once upheld the law, yet failed justice. Through helping Sarah and Lily, he is given a second chance not to erase the past, but to make something right in the present. This teaches us that redemption is not about undoing mistakes, but about choosing better when given another opportunity. Perhaps the most powerful lesson comes from Thomas Voss, a man we never meet alive, yet whose presence shapes the entire story. He trusted a stranger he had never seen. He believed that goodness still existed in the world, and that belief, fragile and risky as it was proved to be justified. His faith becomes the bridge that connects broken people and sets things right. So what, then, is the deeper meaning of this story? It is this: a person is not defined by their worst mistake, but by what they choose to do afterward. No matter how far someone has fallen, there is always a road back if they are willing to face the truth, take responsibility, and act with courage. It also reminds us that goodness often survives in quiet forms, in a child's trust, in a woman's endurance, in a man's decision to stop when he could have kept riding. And finally, it teaches us that sometimes the most important thing we can do in this world is simple: to show up, to stay, and to not turn away when someone needs us. In the end, Cole does not just help deliver justice, he finds a place to belong and a reason to stop running. And that may be the greatest victory of all.